I am Crystal Morgan, 38 years old, and until recently I dedicated 19 years of my life to Nexus Innovations. Through countless late nights, I helped build a tech empire with groundbreaking patents. Then Richard arrived. With Harvard swagger and zero respect, he dismissed 2 decades of my loyalty with 8 careless words. If you are not happy, the door is right there. So I took him up on his offer. By morning, my phone exploded, 49 missed calls. When the founder himself called, everything changed. Before I tell you what happened when I finally answered that call, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. My journey with Nexus Innovations began right after I graduated from MIT. Growing up in a small town outside of Detroit, I never imagined I would end up where I am today. My parents worked at the local factory, scraping together every penny to support our family. They never had the opportunity for higher education, which made them even more determined that I would. When I received that scholarship to MIT, it was like winning the lottery for our entire family. College was tough. Being a woman in engineering in the early 2000s meant constantly proving myself. While my classmates received encouragement, I received skepticism. Every grade, every successful project felt like a personal victory against a system that expected me to fail. But those challenges only fueled my determination. During my final year, Nexus Innovations came to the campus job fair. Back then, they were just a tiny startup with big dreams operating out of a converted warehouse. Marcus Bennett, the founder, personally conducted the interviews. Unlike other companies that seemed uncertain about hiring women engineers, Marcus only cared about talent and passion. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" he asked during our interview. "Creating technology that changes how people live," I answered without hesitation. He smiled. "That is exactly what we are trying to do at Nexus." I started the Monday after graduation. The company had only 23 employees then, and we all knew each other by name. Marcus became more than a boss. He was a mentor who believed in my potential before I fully recognized it myself. Those early years were magical. We worked insane hours fueled by cheap coffee and collective ambition. The company felt like family, with weekend barbecues at Marcus's house and celebration dinners for every small victory. My first major project was improving the energy efficiency of our flagship product. I spent months in the lab testing and refining until we achieved a 40% reduction in power consumption. When the new version launched, orders doubled. Marcus brought champagne to the office and made sure everyone knew my contribution had made it possible. As my confidence grew, so did my ambition. I started developing new technologies that expanded our product line. By year 5, I had 7 patents under my name, all assigned to the company as was standard. Each success cemented my place as a rising star at Nexus. The personal sacrifices piled up quietly in the background. I missed my sister's wedding because we were finalizing a major product launch. Relationships fizzled out when partners realized they would always come second to my work. My father passed away, and I flew home for the funeral on a Sunday, then returned to work on Monday because we had investors visiting. At the time, these sacrifices seemed necessary, even noble. I was building something important, I told myself. By year 10, Nexus had grown to over 300 employees. We moved into a gleaming glass headquarters in the heart of the city. My team expanded to 15 brilliant engineers. The intimate startup atmosphere gradually transformed into corporate culture with departments, hierarchies, and policies. Marcus remained the visionary, but his role evolved. He became the public face of the company, spending more time with investors and less time in the innovation trenches. I still had occasional one-on-one meetings with him, but they became shorter and less frequent. The real game changer came in my 15th year when I began work on what would later be valued as the $450 million patent. It started as a side project, something I explored during quiet hours and weekends. I was fascinated by the possibility of creating a new approach to data encryption that would make secure communication more accessible and exponentially faster. For 2 years, I labored over this technology, hitting countless dead ends before finally achieving a breakthrough. My approach reduced encryption time by 85% while actually improving security. The potential applications were endless: finance, healthcare, government, consumer electronics, any system requiring secure data transmission. When I showed early results to Marcus, he immediately grasped the significance. This could redefine our entire business, he said, eyes wide with excitement. He authorized a special team to support my work, and we made rapid progress. The technology evolved into something truly revolutionary. Internal tests confirmed what we suspected: we had something that could reshape multiple industries. Around this time, significant changes began occurring in the executive suite. Marcus, approaching 60, decided to step back from day-to-day operations. The board brought in seasoned executives from larger tech companies to professionalize our operations. New vice presidents appeared with PowerPoints about scalability, market penetration, and shareholder value. I was too engrossed in my encryption work to pay much attention to these changes. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. The company culture was shifting under my feet, and I failed to notice how dramatic the transformation would be, or how directly it would eventually impact me. The management restructuring announcement came through a company-wide email on a Monday morning. The message was filled with corporate speak about optimizing organizational alignment and streamlining reporting structures. Buried in the third paragraph was the news that would change everything. My department would now report to Richard Harrington, newly hired from a competitor. His biography highlighted his Harvard MBA and previous role as Vice President of Technology at Glowtech Industries. The email emphasized his track record of modernizing legacy systems and driving efficiency improvements. Nothing in that sterile introduction prepared me for the reality of Richard Harrington. Our first meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. I prepared a comprehensive overview of our department projects with special emphasis on the encryption technology. I wanted to impress him to establish a productive working relationship from the start. Richard arrived 15 minutes late, glancing at his phone throughout my presentation. He wore an expensive suit and projected an air of bored superiority. When I mentioned my 19 years with the company, he smiled thinly. "Impressive tenure," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. But in tech, longevity can sometimes indicate complacency rather than value. That comment stung, but I maintained my professionalism. When I described our encryption breakthrough, he finally looked up from his phone. "Interesting concept," he said. "But the market is moving toward cloud-based solutions. We should consider pivoting your resources in that direction." He had completely missed the point. Our encryption technology would revolutionize cloud security itself. I tried to explain this, but he had already moved on to discussing quarterly targets and budget reallocations. As weeks passed, Richard's management style became clear. He surrounded himself with new hires, mostly young men from prestigious business schools, with limited technical experience but impressive networking skills. They spoke his language of disruption and agility, using buzzwords rather than engineering principles. In meetings, Richard consistently overlooked input from veteran team members. When we raised concerns about rushed timelines compromising quality, he dismissed them as resistance to change. He began referring to longtime employees as legacy staff, as though we were outdated equipment rather than the people who built the company. I tried adapting to his expectations. I reframed proposals using his preferred business terminology. I invited him to lab demonstrations to show the tangible progress of our work. I even attended the happy hours he organized at expensive downtown bars, though I felt increasingly out of place among the new crowd. Nothing worked. During a department presentation, I watched him check his watch repeatedly as I spoke, then perk up immediately when one of his new protégés took the floor. The message was clear: my nearly 2 decades of contributions held no value in his eyes. The conflicts escalated when Richard began redirecting resources away from my encryption project. First, he reassigned 2 key engineers to a strategic initiative that seemed to exist mainly in PowerPoint. Then he questioned the budget for specialized testing equipment we needed. "Is this really the best allocation of capital?" he asked during a budget review. "Perhaps we should focus on projects with more immediate market applications." I fought back with data showing the potential revenue projections once the technology was complete. I secured support from the product team, who were already planning applications based on our encryption system. Richard countered by creating a competing project headed by Bradley, his favorite new hire. Suddenly there were 2 encryption initiatives, with mine increasingly portrayed as the legacy approach. In meetings, Richard would turn to Bradley. "Give us your thoughts on the modern approach to this problem." He would say, the emphasis on modern making his preference clear. As my frustration grew, I sought help from human resources. Janet in HR had been with the company almost as long as I had. I thought she would understand the situation. "It sounds like you are having trouble adapting to new leadership," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Change can be difficult, especially when you have been used to doing things a certain way for so long." "This is not about resistance to change," I insisted. "This is about valuable work being undermined and expertise being ignored." She nodded sympathetically while typing notes into her computer. "Have you tried scheduling more one-on-one time with Richard to build rapport?" I left her office feeling defeated. The system that I thought would protect dedicated employees was instead protecting the new management structure. Meanwhile, other veteran employees began departing. First Thomas from product development, then Sophia from my own team. Each departure was announced in a brief email thanking them for their service, quickly forgotten as new faces filled the empty desks. Through all this turbulence, I remained focused on my encryption technology. If anything, the adversity made me more determined to prove its value. My core team, the ones Richard had not yet reassigned, worked with renewed purpose. We were no longer just developing technology. We were vindicating our approach and our place in the company. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening. After months of refinement, we solved the final challenge in our encryption algorithm. The system now worked flawlessly across all test scenarios with performance metrics that exceeded even our ambitious targets. This was the moment that would silence all doubts. I stayed late documenting the results, preparing the perfect presentation to demonstrate our achievement. For the first time in months, I felt genuine excitement about coming to work the next day. This technology would speak for itself in a language even Richard would have to acknowledge. The big presentation was scheduled for Monday morning. I spent the entire weekend refining it, creating demonstrations that would make the technology accessible even to non-technical executives. This was not just about proving Richard wrong. It was about securing the future of a project that could transform the company and the industry. I arrived early to set up in the main conference room. Executives filed in gradually, including Marcus, who had made time for this presentation, despite his reduced involvement in day-to-day operations. Richard arrived last, flanked by Bradley and two other members of his inner circle. From the moment I began speaking, I could feel Richard's dismissive energy. While other executives leaned forward with interest as I explained the breakthrough, Richard lounged in his chair, occasionally whispering to Bradley. When I demonstrated the speed comparison between our encryption and current industry standards, there were audible gasps from around the table, but Richard merely raised an eyebrow. During the question period, the chief financial officer asked about potential market applications. Before I could fully answer, Richard interrupted. "While the technical achievement is commendable, we should be cautious about overstating market impact. Bradley's team has identified several limitations in real-world applications." Bradley nodded on cue. Despite having never been granted access to our full technical specifications, he launched into a critique based on outdated information from earlier versions of our system. I waited for him to finish before calmly addressing each point with current data. The executives seemed satisfied with my responses, and Marcus was openly enthusiastic about the potential. "This could be the most significant innovation we have developed in years," Marcus said. "Crystal, your team has done extraordinary work here." I left the meeting cautiously optimistic. The technology had spoken for itself, and most of the leadership recognized its value. Perhaps this would mark a turning point in my relationship with Richard. That hope evaporated the next morning. An email from Richard outlined next steps for the encryption project. The plan involves splitting the technology development between multiple teams to ensure diverse approaches and accelerate time to market. My team would focus on foundation elements, while Bradley's team would handle market-ready implementation and strategic direction. It was a sophisticated power play. Richard was positioning himself to control the most visible aspects of the project while relegating me to background work. Even more disturbing, he was setting up a structure where Bradley would be credited with the final product, despite having contributed nothing to the core innovation. Later that week, through a loyal colleague in the IT department, I discovered something even more alarming. Richard had been discussing my project in emails weeks before the presentation, already planning how to sideline me. One message to Bradley read, Once we have a complete understanding of her approach, we can modernize and optimize it under your direction. Start thinking about transition plans. Another email to HR inquired about retirement packages for senior employees and transition strategies for knowledge transfer from legacy staff. My name appeared prominently in the attached list. The evidence was clear. Richard was not just undervaluing my contribution, he was actively planning to push me out while extracting my intellectual property. Nearly 2 decades of loyalty, and I was being treated as disposable. I decided to confront him directly. No HR mediators, no witnesses, just an honest conversation to understand his perspective and clarify my position. I knocked on his office door the following afternoon. "Do you have a moment to discuss the encryption project reorganization?" Richard gestured to a chair without looking up from his computer. "Make it quick. I have a call in 15 minutes. I laid out my concerns professionally, emphasizing the inefficiency of splitting the project and the importance of maintaining the original vision. I pointed to our demonstrated results and the positive executive response. He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of impatience and condescension. "Crystal, I understand you feel ownership of this project. That is natural given your involvement. But Nexus needs to evolve, and that means fresh perspectives and modern management approaches." "This is not about ownership," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "This is about effectively developing a technology that could transform our company's future. My team created this innovation from concept to proof, and we are best positioned to bring it to completion." His smile never reached his eyes. "That is your opinion. And while I appreciate your passion, I need to make decisions based on what is best for the department and the company." "And you believe that sidelining the team that created this technology is what is best?" I asked. "I believe fresh perspectives prevent stagnation," he replied. "Bradley brings contemporary methodologies that complement the foundation work." The conversation continued in this circular pattern. Every point I made was acknowledged, then dismissed. Richard had made his decision before I entered the room, and nothing I said would change it. Finally, frustration broke through my professional veneer. "You have been planning to push me aside since you arrived. Why? What have I done except deliver exceptional work for this company?" His facade of politeness finally cracked. "What have you done? You have clung to outdated approaches and resisted necessary changes at every turn. Your long tenure has made you entitled and inflexible. This company needs innovation, not custodians of the past." "I literally just presented a revolutionary innovation that executives are calling our most significant breakthrough in years," I said incredulously. "An innovation that will reach its full potential under forward-thinking leadership," he countered. The conversation had become pointless. I stood to leave, then paused with one last question. "Have you ever actually created something yourself, Richard? Not managed, not directed, but built something from nothing?" His face flushed with anger. "I do not need to justify my career to you. If you cannot adapt to new leadership and modern business practices, perhaps Nexus is no longer the right place for you. If you are not happy, the door is right there." 19 years, nearly half my life devoted to this company, and it came down to this dismissive statement in a sterile office. Something snapped inside me. Not in a dramatic, emotional way, but in a quiet moment of perfect clarity. I looked at Richard, at his expensive suit and practiced executive posture, and realized he represented a future at Nexus I no longer wanted any part of. I smiled, closed my laptop, and replied, "You are right. Thank you for the clarity." Richard looked momentarily confused, as if he had expected pleading or anger, not calm acceptance. I gathered my personal items from my desk, mainly photos and a few books. The encryption work remained on company servers, but the most recent developments, the critical breakthrough elements, were still in my private notes, and test files not yet fully documented in the system. Walking through the office one last time felt surreal. A few colleagues looked up in confusion as I passed with my small box of belongings. Lisa from my team started to ask a question, but something in my expression stopped her. The drive home passed in a blur of numbness. 19 years finished in less than 19 minutes. I had no plan, no next steps, just the quiet of my car and the sudden unexpected freedom of having no workplace to return to tomorrow. I arrived home and set my box of belongings on the kitchen counter. The silence of my apartment was deafening after the chaos of the day. For years, I had returned home late, only to continue working, until I fell asleep. Now in the middle of the afternoon, I stood in my living room with nowhere to be and nothing to do. The emotional impact hit all at once. I sank onto my couch and the tears finally came, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and grief for a professional life I had thought would be my legacy. I had given Nexus everything, prioritizing the company above my own health, relationships, and personal goals. In return, I had been casually discarded, my contributions devalued, by someone who had contributed nothing to building the company. I cried until exhaustion overtook me. When I woke, it was dark outside. My phone showed multiple missed calls from colleagues, but none from Richard or any executive. Their silence spoke volumes. That night became a journey through the stages of grief. Denial faded quickly, impossible to maintain in the face of what had happened. Anger burned hot, directed at Richard, at Marcus for allowing this culture shift, and at myself for being so blindly loyal. Depression lurked at the edges, whispering about wasted years and uncertain futures. But as the night progressed, something unexpected emerged. Clarity. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was thinking about what I wanted, not what Nexus needed. With this clarity came a crucial realization about my encryption technology. I reviewed my employment contract, which I had signed 19 years ago and never revisited. Like most tech employees, I had agreed that inventions created during my employment belonged to the company. However, the contract specified that inventions must be fully documented and disclosed to the company to transfer ownership. The final breakthrough, the element that made the entire system viable, had occurred just days ago. While I had demonstrated it, I had not yet submitted complete technical documentation to the company records. The core innovation remained primarily in my private notes and personal development environment. Moreover, there was a critical clause regarding inventions created outside normal working hours and beyond the scope of assigned duties. The encryption system had begun as a side project, something I explored on weekends and after hours. I had meticulous logs of my work schedule, distinguishing between company-assigned projects and personal exploration. By sunrise, I had developed a theory that the most valuable elements of the encryption technology might legally still belong to me. But I needed expert confirmation. I contacted Patricia Winters, a lawyer specializing in intellectual property in the tech industry. Her firm had represented several engineers in high-profile patent disputes. She agreed to see me immediately when I explained the urgency. Based on what you have described, there appears to be legitimate grounds for claiming ownership of the core innovation, Patricia said, after reviewing my contract and work logs. The company will fight this vigorously, but your documentation of independent development time works strongly in your favor. What should I do now? I asked. First, we file provisional patent applications immediately to establish your claim. Then we prepare for the company's response, which will be swift and aggressive. We spent the entire day preparing documentation and filing emergency intellectual property protections. Patricia warned me that this would trigger a major legal battle, but also assured me that my position was stronger than most in similar situations. The timing of your departure works in our favor, she explained. If they pushed you out immediately after you revealed valuable intellectual property, it strengthens the narrative that you were treated unfairly. By evening, we had filed the necessary paperwork to protect my interests in the encryption technology. The provisional patents were under my name, not Nexus Innovations. The company would be notified of the filings within 48 hours. Prepare yourself, Patricia warned as I left her office. Once they realize what has happened, they will pull out all stops to regain control. She was right. The calls began that evening, first from HR, then from the legal department, and finally from Richard himself. I let them all go to voicemail, following Patricia's advice not to communicate without preparation. The messages evolved from concerned inquiries about my abrupt departure to increasingly urgent requests for meetings to discuss ongoing projects and knowledge transfer. By midnight, Richard's tone had shifted from corporate politeness to barely contained panic. Crystal, it is imperative that we meet immediately to discuss the encryption project documentation. Please call me at any hour when you receive this message. I slept surprisingly well that night, better than I had in years. The weight of constant work pressure had lifted, replaced by a strange new sense of personal agency. For the first time in my adult life, I was fighting for myself, not for Nexus. Morning brought a flood of new messages. The count reached 49. Missed calls by 9 a.m. Emails piled up with escalating urgency. The legal department had discovered my patent filings and recognized the threat they posed. Then came the call I had been waiting for. Marcus Bennett, founder and chairman, the man who had hired me 19 years ago, was finally getting involved. When my phone rang for the 50th time, I recognized Marcus's number. Following my lawyer's guidance, I recorded the call for documentation purposes. Crystal. What is happening? Marcus sounded genuinely distressed. I just heard you left the company yesterday and now there are reports about patent filings. Talk to me. Hello, Marcus, I replied calmly. Yes, I am no longer with Nexus. As Richard put it, if I was not happy, the door was right there. So I took the door. Richard said that to you. Shock colored his voice. There must be some misunderstanding. We would never want to lose you, especially not like this. It was quite clear, I said. But that is not the only issue. For months, I have been systematically sidelined, my work undermined, and now Richard was planning to take credit for my encryption technology while pushing me out of the company. Silence stretched across the line before Marcus responded. These are serious allegations, Crystal. We need to discuss this face to face. Can we meet today? We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, away from the Nexus offices. Patricia advised me on what to say and what to avoid during this conversation. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, a habit from his startup days. He had aged noticeably since stepping back from daily operations, gray now dominating his once dark hair. When he saw me, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his face: relief, concern, and something that looked surprisingly like guilt. Thank you for meeting me, he said as we sat with our coffees. The tension between us was palpable, decades of history now strained by recent events. I want to understand exactly what happened, Marcus began. You have been with Nexus almost since the beginning. What could possibly have gone so wrong that you would leave without notice? I gave him a precise account of the past months, Richard's systematic dismissal of veteran employees, the creation of competing projects, the plan to reassign critical aspects of my encryption work, and finally the confrontation in Richard's office. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression darkening. This is not the company culture I built, he said finally, and not how someone of your contributions should be treated. I want you to come back. We can reassign you to report directly to me away from Richard's department. It is not that simple anymore, I replied. The encryption technology that I demonstrated last week, are you aware of exactly how it was developed? Marcus frowned. I know your team has been working on it for some time and that it represents a potential breakthrough for secure communications. I began that work on my own time outside my assigned projects. The critical innovations that make it viable were never fully documented in the company system. Under the terms of my original employment contract, those elements likely remain my intellectual property. The color drained from Marcus's face as he grasped the implications. You have filed for patents independently. Yes, I confirmed. Provisional patents have been filed under my name. Crystal, this technology could be worth hundreds of millions. The company has invested significant resources in its development. The company invested in my department, which Richard was systematically dismantling. He made it clear that my contributions were not valued and that he was preparing to push me out while claiming credit for my innovation. I simply protected what was legally mine. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from the early days when we faced startup challenges. This will create a legal nightmare for everyone involved. I did not want this outcome, I said truthfully. I wanted to build this technology for Nexus, the company I helped grow, but Richard made that impossible. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me messages from their executive chat group. Richard was already attempting to control the narrative, claiming I had become unstable and combative before absconding with proprietary information. He portrayed himself as the reasonable manager dealing with a difficult employee. This is completely false, I said, anger rising in my voice. He is trying to cover his tracks. I believe you, Marcus said. I have known you for 19 years. Richard has been with us less than 6 months. But the board is concerned about the patent situation. Several members have already suggested pursuing aggressive legal action. That would be unwise, I replied, sharing what Patricia had told me about my legal position. Additionally, I have already been approached by 3 of your competitors who are very interested in this encryption technology. That revelation hit Marcus hard. The idea that Nexus's proprietary technology might end up with competitors clearly terrified him. What do you want, Crystal? There must be a way to resolve this that benefits both you and the company you helped build. I laid out my conditions: Richard's removal, structural changes to protect innovation and veteran employees, and proper compensation for my patent rights that reflected their true market value. Richard's termination might be possible given these circumstances, but the board will resist a complete management overhaul, Marcus said, and the compensation you are suggesting would be unprecedented. So is losing $450 million in intellectual property because a new manager wanted to assert dominance, I countered. We parted without resolution, both understanding the gravity of the situation. Marcus promised to take my concerns to the board, but made no commitments beyond that. I truly regret that it has come to this, he said as we stood to leave. I should have been more present, more aware of what was happening in the company. Yes, you should have, I agreed. The Nexus I joined valued people and innovation above politics. Remember when you told me you wanted to create technology that changes how people live? That mission got lost somewhere along the way. As I watched Marcus walk away, I felt a complex mix of sadness for what had been lost and determination to stand my ground. The ball was now in his court. Word of my departure spread quickly through the tech industry. Former colleagues reached out first cautiously, then with increasing openness as they learned more details. Many shared similar experiences of feeling devalued under the new management regime. Within days, I received inquiries from several major tech companies interested in discussing my encryption technology and potential employment opportunities. Venture capitalists who specialized in spinning off innovations into new companies contacted me through LinkedIn and mutual connections. A senior VP at Tech Fusion, Nexus's largest competitor, invited me to lunch. We have been watching your patent filings with great interest, she said. The applications you have described could revolutionize our security offerings. As these conversations progressed, I maintained careful boundaries, following Patricia's advice not to make commitments while the situation with Nexus remained unresolved. Still, each meeting reinforced what I was beginning to fully appreciate: the market value of my innovation was even greater than I had initially estimated. Meanwhile, Nexus was struggling without me. According to my former team members, Richard had assembled an emergency group to recreate my work, but they were missing critical elements. Bradley, his protege, was failing spectacularly at leading the effort, exposing his limited technical understanding. They have the framework but not the engine, Lisa texted me. Richard is in full panic mode, yelling at everyone and making impossible demands. Industry analysts began noting unusual activity. A planned product announcement was abruptly postponed. The company's stock price wobbled as rumors circulated about internal turmoil. A technology blog published a blind item about a major security innovation held hostage by personnel conflicts at a leading tech firm. 7 days after my departure, Marcus called again. The board has convened an emergency meeting about your situation. Richard has been temporarily sidelined pending an investigation into his management practices. That sounds like a start, I replied. We would like to present a formal offer regarding the encryption technology, Marcus continued. Would you be willing to meet with our legal team tomorrow? The meeting took place at Patricia's office. Nexus sent their chief counsel and a senior board member along with Marcus. They presented an offer that included a consulting arrangement for me to complete the encryption implementation, a licensing fee for the patent rights, and assurances about proper credit for the innovation. Patricia and I reviewed the terms privately. This is an improvement, but still significantly undervalues your contribution, she advised. The licensing structure gives them perpetual rights for a one-time payment that represents perhaps 10% of the technology's true value. I rejected the offer respectfully but firmly. This does not reflect the market reality of what this innovation represents. The Nexus representatives exchanged glances. What would it take to resolve this situation? The board member asked directly. Full recognition of my ownership rights, fair market compensation based on independent valuation, and structural changes to ensure this situation never happens to another innovator at Nexus, I replied. They left, promising to consider my position. Later that day, industry news sites reported that Nexus stock had dropped 7% amid rumors of intellectual property complications with a forthcoming product line. That evening, I received a call from a former colleague now working at Nexus's primary investor firm. They held another emergency board meeting this afternoon, she informed me. Richard has been terminated effective immediately. The official story is strategic differences, but everyone knows the real reason. While this represented a victory of sorts, it did not resolve the fundamental issue of my patent rights. The next morning, Marcus called again with a revised offer. The terms were improved, but still undervalued the technology. The board feels this is a generous package given the collaborative nature of product development at Nexus, he explained. Yet the board was comfortable allowing Richard to claim credit for work he did not do, I pointed out. This offer still treats my innovation as company property with a finder's fee for me rather than my intellectual property that the company wishes to license. After another rejection, the stakes escalated further. Industry news reported that Nexus had postponed their quarterly earnings call, a nearly unprecedented move that sent stocks tumbling another 12%. 3 days later, after what must have been intense internal discussions, Marcus requested a private meeting, just the two of us. We met at the same coffee shop as before. Marcus looked exhausted, the strain of the situation evident in the dark circles under his eyes. I have been fighting for you with the board, he began. They finally understand the precariousness of our position. We cannot afford to lose this technology, and we cannot risk seeing it in the hands of competitors. He slid a folder across the table. This is our final offer. I personally guaranteed you would find it acceptable. The terms were transformative: an equity stake in Nexus, equivalent to being a founding member, a leadership position heading a new innovation division, reporting directly to the board, and most significantly full acknowledgement of my ownership of the patent, with a licensing agreement valuing it at $450 million. The valuation comes from independent analysts, Marcus explained. It is what the market truly believes this technology is worth. I studied the document carefully. And the company culture issues. We are implementing a complete review of management practices and protection for innovation leaders, Marcus assured me. Richard's departure is just the beginning. We have lost 8 valuable team members in the past 6 months, and the board finally recognizes this as a systemic problem. The offer represented everything I had asked for and more. Yet I found myself hesitating. Did I want to return to Nexus, even on these dramatically improved terms, or was this the moment to make a complete break and pursue one of the other opportunities that had emerged? The decision would shape not just my career but the next chapter of my life. After careful consideration and consultation with Patricia, I accepted the offer with additional conditions regarding implementation timelines and independent oversight of the cultural changes. 2 weeks after walking out of Richard's office, I returned to Nexus, not as an employee, but as an executive partner with equity stake and board-level influence. The contract signing took place in the main conference room, the same space where I had presented the encryption technology that sparked this entire situation. As Marcus and I signed the final documents, I thought about the journey from that first interview 19 years ago to this moment of transformation. Welcome back, Marcus said, shaking my hand formally before pulling me into an unexpected hug. Or perhaps I should say welcome to the new beginning. Richard's departure created ripples throughout the organization. His inner circle quickly scattered, some following him to other companies, others attempting to reinvent themselves as team players. Bradley, his primary protege, resigned within days of my return, unable to face the technical team he had helped undermine. My first official act as innovation director was to meet with my former encryption team. We have work to complete, I told them simply, and a company culture to rebuild. Lisa smiled. We never doubted you would find a way to make things right. Returning to the office felt both familiar and strange. The physical environment remained unchanged, but the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. Executives who had previously ignored me now sought my input. My equity stake made me one of the largest individual shareholders, a fact that transformed how the board related to me. Over the following months, Marcus and I worked together to establish new company policies that protected innovation and valued experienced employees. We implemented a technical career track that allowed engineers to advance without moving into management recognition programs that celebrated significant contributions, regardless of title, and mentoring structures that preserved institutional knowledge. The encryption technology was formally launched 6 months after my return. The market response exceeded even our optimistic projections. Security experts hailed it as revolutionary, and implementation contracts flowed in from financial institutions, government agencies, and technology partners. As the technology proved its value, the $450 million valuation began to look conservative. By the 1-year mark, analyst estimates placed its worth at over $600 million, with projected growth continuing upward. The professional victory came with personal lessons that transformed my approach to work and life. For years, I had defined myself entirely through my contributions to Nexus, neglecting relationships, health, and personal growth in service to the company mission. Now, despite having more responsibility than ever before, I established firm boundaries. I left the office by 6 p.m. most days. I declined weekend work except in genuine emergencies. I reconnected with family members who had grown accustomed to my absence at important events. I started dating again, something that had seemed impossible during my years of 80-hour work weeks. I met Daniel, a professor of literature whose perspective on life provided a refreshing counterpoint to my technical world. Our relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully, built on mutual respect rather than convenience or proximity. Perhaps most meaningful was the opportunity to mentor other women in technology. I established a formal program at Nexus and spoke regularly at industry events about creating sustainable innovation cultures. The greatest technical breakthroughs come from people who feel valued and secure, became my constant message. Treat your innovators as disposable, and they will take their innovations elsewhere. Young engineers, particularly women, sought me out for advice on navigating careers in technology. I shared my story openly, including the mistakes I had made in sacrificing too much for corporate loyalty. Know your worth, I told them. Document your contributions, and never assume that dedication alone will protect you from poor leadership. There were still difficult moments. Occasionally in executive meetings, someone would reference the unpleasantness, with Richard minimizing the systematic problems that had enabled his behavior. Some longtime executives resented my rapid elevation to leadership. These challenges required constant vigilance to ensure the cultural changes took root, rather than becoming superficial policies. 4 years after my dramatic departure and return, Marcus announced his retirement. During his farewell speech, he called me to the stage unexpectedly. When I founded Nexus, I dreamed of creating technology that would change how people live, he said, echoing the mission that had drawn me to the company initially. But companies are not just their products, they are the people who create them. Crystal reminded us of that fundamental truth when we had lost our way. As I stood beside him, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal that had felt like an ending had instead forced a new beginning, not just for me, but for the company itself. The encryption technology ultimately generated over $1 billion in revenue and became the foundation for a suite of security products that transformed Nexus's market position. What began as Richard's attempt to sideline me had instead cemented my legacy and reshaped the company's future. The experience taught me that sometimes walking away is not an admission of defeat but a powerful assertion of worth. That loyalty should be reciprocal, not exploitative. That standing your ground against injustice can create positive change far beyond your personal situation. Most importantly, I learned that professional accomplishments, however significant, mean little without personal fulfillment and authentic relationships to give them context. True success comes not from sacrificing everything for work, but from creating a life where work is just one component of a rich, multidimensional existence. 5 years to the day after Richard told me the door is right there, Marcus and I met for coffee at our usual spot. Now, both board members with long histories at Nexus, we had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared vision. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Richard had treated you with the respect you deserved? Marcus asked. I considered the question carefully. The encryption technology would have launched sooner with less drama. The company would have been spared a costly conflict. but the underlying cultural problems might have continued unchecked. Sometimes it takes a crisis to force necessary change. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. When Richard dismissed you that day, he thought he was showing strength. Instead, he revealed how little he understood about true leadership or innovation. His arrogance cost him his career and nearly cost the company its future. While my unexpected departure created short-term chaos, I agreed it ultimately led to something better for everyone involved except perhaps Richard. Looking back at that pivotal moment when I closed my laptop and walked away, I realize now it was not just about standing up for myself or protecting my innovation. It was about refusing to participate in a culture that devalued people and their contributions. Sometimes the greatest professional courage is simply knowing when to say enough and walk through the door that someone else opened thinking it was a threat rather than an opportunity. Have you ever had to walk away from something you cared about deeply because your contributions were not respected? How did you find the courage to take that step? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself in the workplace. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to recognize their own value. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the door that seems to be closing behind you is actually opening to a better future ahead.